Hello everyone, I'm back. First things first, ignore the fact that I'm dressed like Penelope Garcia from Criminal Minds. I assure you it's intentional. Tomorrow's Halloween, but I have a lot of shit to do tomorrow, so I was dressing up today. But today I'm coming at you with a video about things that both scare and entice me. This is a very weird, spooky Halloween video about an actually scary concept, which is thought reform, known to pop psychologists as brainwashing. This is going to be part of a series where I talk about the good, the bad, and the ugly parts of fashion and aesthetics. And today I wanted to talk about the aesthetics that are associated with cults and cultism, as well as occultism, like with an O and two C's. So, first things first is that thought reform and the concept of being brainwashed, even though that's sort of a reductive and weirdly mystical way of explaining what's happening, that's very scary to me. I think cults are terrifying. I think cult leaders of history are very scary. And I wanted to just do a little video that is about something actually scary this Halloween. In the midst of this fear of mine of being sort of a part of a dangerous sort of ideology without my knowing, like sort of having the rug ripped out from under you, you think you're like at a party with friends, all of a sudden it's suddenly a high control group. That's very scary, but with that fear of mine comes a fascination. I devour cult psychology books. I'm really into the side of history that deals with cultism as well as occultism, although they are very different. They do have some overlap, and I want to kind of talk about both today. So I will just say I come to this video, it's a little half-baked, this concept of mine. I will be definitely doing videos similar and maybe more baked in terms of ideas down the line, but I just wanted to come at you today with some educational only purposes, examples of interesting aesthetics that have come from cults, as well as the occult. So first of all, what's the difference? I would say that there's obvious overlap and also obvious differences. You know, not all occult groups are cults, not all occult activity is cultish activity, and not all cults are occult or dealing with the occult. But I think where there is overlap is that there's a focus on forces outside of human control and like the human response to those forces. So there's just sort of like a little tinge of esotericism to both, I would say. As well as both cultists and occultists are seeking answers greater than the human mind and human comprehension. That's like a very boiled down difference and similarity, but you know, I'm just gonna go with that for what I'm trying to do today. So really just what I wanted to talk about was some examples of interesting fashion and aesthetic and, you know, art, music, literature, interesting artistic gestures that have come out of cults and the occult. And there's really no larger point to this besides, isn't that interesting? You know, I'm still sort of like doing a lot of research about this. I am including certain parts of what I'm learning in my novel, which I'm writing about a cult survivor. And really, like, there's no, I try not to approach this from a place of voyeurism or morbid curiosity. There is a little bit of like a background in my own life that leads me to really relate to cult survivors and really relate to the perils of a high control group. I'm not going to go into what that means or what that's about, but just trust me when I say this is not like some, you know, weird voyeuristic thing I'm trying to do here. It's coming from a genuine place of what I'm trying to understand, really. I will just briefly say that a lot of my fascination around cults specifically stems from just like a fundamental confusion about what the leaders get from their exploits, if that makes sense. Just speaking as a person who is often controlled by other people and very seldom gets enjoyment from the control of others, it's like a mystery to me why people do it or what people get out of it, like why that titillates people to control others. Like, that's just something I fundamentally don't understand. I come in contact with it all the time. I'm like a very controllable person, unfortunately. And I think the mystery, like the puzzle that I keep trying to solve, is like, what is the mechanism of joy and pleasure that someone gets from the control of another person? Like, okay, so you're telling this person what to wear and they're doing it. Big whoop. You know, I fundamentally just, there's a disconnect there. And I'm trying to bridge the gap because I think it'll help me just understand humanity better, like, as a concept. So anyway, that's mostly where my interest in this lies, is just, why does this happen? Why is this an interesting thing that people like to do? What do the leaders get out of it besides power and money? I mean, those are really two tangible concepts I can wrap my mind around, but it's the jollies that they get from being a puppet master that I just fundamentally can't understand. So, with all of that being said, this is a genuine, like, fixation of my, like, you know, kind of like a very special interest, as they call it. And I just wanted to bring back some examples from cults as well as the occult in terms of fashion, art, music, literature that I find interesting. That's really it. No capital I, lowercase I, interesting. And I think as someone who is interested in fashion, it's important for me to sometimes embrace head-on that fashion and music and art and literature, it does come with a dark side, as with everything on this bitch of an earth. So with that being said, I would like to just bring your attention, surprisingly, there is a lot of sort of fashion, music, art, literature that I think is noteworthy, that is in the orbit of various high control groups. The first, maybe a glaringly obvious example, is the Nike decades that Heaven's Gate wore when they all collectively committed suicide to join, you know, their higher purpose, according to the leader of Heaven's Gate, Marshall Applewhite, aka Doe. I believe he was Doe. There was a T and there was a Doe when she left, and he's... Anyway, Nike decades. And I just want to talk about that because it's just such a fascinating, like, coming from someone who really loves clothes, responds to clothes, thinks clothes are important, like, the concept of picking a specific shoe for an entire group suicide pact to wear is a very fascinating concept to me. There's no, there's not a whole larger message that I can really draw from this. It's just fascinating. These Nike decades, not necessarily the ones that were literally on the feet of the people who died, but the type of shoe is forever immortalized. You can get a pair for like $600 on eBay. It's just become like this very bizarre moment of consumerism in a sea of this esoteric bullshit that Marshall Applewhite was spouting. Not to mention that this group suicide that happened was also a very interesting subject of a lot of t-shirts. I've seen a lot of "What if Heaven's Gate was right" t-shirts that have come out of this. So there's just this sort of interesting, like, history, fashion, esotericism, all kind of intertwining into a really interesting and juicy sort of piece tidbit that I personally find so fascinating. Just like the concept of picking a suicide shoe is just an interesting thing to me. With that in mind, I think also that Tony Alamo and his jackets are a really interesting piece of cult fashion history. If you don't know, Tony Alamo and Alamo Ministries were run by Tony and Susan Alamo. They're just sort of like your generic evangelical Christians, except they're you know, evil. They're cultish people, trying to just rope people in, get people into their organization, and what they did with that power was force people in their congregation to make these really elaborate, ostensibly gorgeous, rhinestone jackets that were worn by Madonna, Michael Jackson. You know, this is just like a thing in Hollywood, is these really gorgeous, weird, bedazzled jackets that were made with coerced labor. Now, the interesting thing about that is that that's how most jackets are made, if we're being completely honest. This is what I'm talking about when I'm saying fashion has a dark side. There's like a dark side to how our clothes are made, and the Alamo jackets are a really ghoulish and garish sort of example of this, where like tired, hungry Christians were made to hand bedazzled jackets at the behest of this crazed, weird, pedophilic cult leader, you know, so that's like a really garish, ghoulish example of coerced labor into making clothes. But I would say that that's arguably sort of a similar conditions under which a lot of clothes are made, is one of my points here. So it's like, I've heard people say there's no way in hell I would wear an Alamo jacket. I would never wear something that was made with coercive labor. And I would say, well, you bought a jacket that was made in Bangladesh, like under not great conditions as well. So do you see what I'm trying to say? I'm not really saying like go out and buy an Alamo jacket. It's just one of these things that is interesting. Like, this is like an interesting thought experiment that I'm trying to make you think about. And I would just like, one last thing is just, can you imagine, like, this is a cult thing to make your followers be unpaid, overworked employees of yours in like a money-making venture. What a bizarre choice that bedazzled artistic jackets were on Tony Alamo's part. Just a very unique, weird example of coercive labor in cults and the products they make. You know, 3HO, Happy, Healthy, Hungry, the Happy, Healthy, Holy organization, they produce yogi tea. Yogi tea, if you didn't know, is owned and operated by a cult. So it's just kind of like an interesting thing whenever someone chooses different products to use to make money for their organization. Jackets, bedazzled jackets is what he chose. I don't know. Now circling over to this very strange sect of Scientology. It was kind of an offshoot of Scientology that became a little more extreme, a little more nefarious, was the Process Church for the, what is it called? The Process Church of the Final Judgment. And these are just a very controversial religious group founded in the 60s. It's kind of just like a unique blend of Christian and occult beliefs. It may have inspired Charles Manson's brand of Christianity, where Jesus and the devil, it's all the same thing, blah, blah, blah. But I want to direct your attention to their clothing. They have their own really interesting, really special and unique logo symbol that just kind of looks like a new age swastika. That's an interesting choice. And their garb is sort of like Rasputin sort of vibes. Their leader is kind of that classic white boy, long hair with a beard. Oh, do I remind you of anybody? Jesus, maybe? That was a surprisingly common way to start a cult, is, do I remind you of anybody? You know? So, I really do think that this church has an interesting look to it. Their fashion choices are interesting. Kind of more interesting than your average Scientologist choice of look. Now branching into the Manson family, unfortunately, we really do have to talk about Bobby Beausoleil's incredible drip. I'm so sorry. It's just really, really good stuff is the looks of Mr. Bobby Beausoleil. If you don't know, he's kind of the catalyst of what set off the Tate LaBianca murders. He was participating in the murder of Gary Hinman. He got picked up for that murder, and allegedly members of the family decided to go out and murder people in a similar way that he murdered Hinman in order to make it seem like the killer was still out there. That's one of the stories, one of the motives of the infamous Tate LaBianca murders. Now, circling back to Mr. Beausoleil's drip, it's really, really good. I'm sorry to say, it's really incredible stuff we've got here. He's got these boots, he's got this top hat. He just looks like a hearse driver from the Victorian era, but he's a verified hippie. You know, it's just, this is really interesting. The fashion side of history is a really interesting subject for me, and it's the first thing I notice about any historical context, anything that I read about. And Bobby Beausoleil's fashion, it caught my eye, it caught my attention. He has, you know, repented for his roles in everything. It's just kind of an interesting side note is that that dude could dress, I will say. Related to that is that the young ladies who were convicted of killing everyone in the Tate house as well as the LaBianca house, they also had some really incredible dresses when they were walking to court. If you just look at pictures of Susan Atkins and Patricia Krenwinkel and Leslie Van Houten, they're all decked out in really, really amazing dresses. I don't know where they got those. They look Victorian revival, 1960s kind of vibes. Just really stunning stuff. And I just want to take this moment to say this is not like an edgy thing of like, oh, murderers have cool clothes. It's really just like an interesting snapshot in fashion history when someone in the limelight, someone in the spotlight is dressed a certain way. Like, that's just something I notice, you know what I mean? So it's just one of these things where I'm like, oh, I like that dress. And I could do an entire video about the Tate LaBianca murders, the family, all of that stuff, because this is my favorite nonfiction book. It's like a really well-written, fantastic book about all of that. And, you know, all of these accounts that have been verified by numerous interviews of people who were there. Helter Skelter, the book about it from the perspective of the prosecutor who prosecuted Manson and the Manson girls, has been largely debunked by Chaos by Tom O'Neill. So I do really find this part of history very interesting. There's just a lot of material there. There's a lot to think about, a lot to look at. It's just one of these things that just has been stained on the American consciousness forever. So there's a lot of really interesting, strange stuff to get out of this exact chapter in history. Honorable mentions, of course, go to the residents of Rajneeshpuram as well as Rajneesh himself. Very strange moment when there's an entire city of people following a man. They're living in relative communal sort of, not poverty. I mean, there's just sort of like a emphasis on renouncing earthly possessions. Meanwhile, the leader of such an organization is, you know, driving Rolls Royces, has 3 Rolexes on his left arm. You know, it's just one of these things that is weirdly very familiar to the rest of us in terms of, you know, save your water, don't turn on the shower for too long, but also I'm going to run like all of this clean water through my AI factory. You know, I mean, I'm just saying there's like a lot of overlap between a cultish organization as well as just sort of like what day-to-day life is like for the rest of us, I would say. There are more examples. I will definitely continue this as a series of just strange, interesting moments in fashion history. So what can a normal person take from the grand artistic gestures of a more sinister ideology? And the answer is, I don't know. I don't know. I do think that these garments that are in the orbit of these sort of bizarre human goings-on, humans are going to express themselves artistically through fashion, music, art, and whatnot, no matter what sort of other things they've got going on. And I will just say, I think abject horror and aversion to such things is the wrong response. It does kind of seem like this is like a oddity or a curiosity about certain eras of history, and it just seems like it's one of these things that should be regarded as like, you know, when John Wayne Gacy painted clowns, you're just kind of like, okay, I don't know what to do with that information, but I'm sort of glad I know it. I also think it's interesting that fashion is a tool of control sometimes. Like, wearing specific clothes or wearing no clothes at all can be a tool of control. Like, everyone in the same uniform can sort of like de-individualize everyone as a group. You know, just think about like Mormon underwear. There's just sort of like a Mennonite uniform. I mean, like, there's just something about picking the garment someone wears as a tool of control, and there's just something interesting about that to me. The grand message of this is all for educational purposes only. There is no reverence or real feelings about any of this one way or the other. I do think this sort of intersection between history and fashion and bizarre goings-on is just like a trifecta of things I'm interested in, and I would love to just make this a series of like fashion when it goes kind of wrong, fashion when it goes kind of bad. So this video was really nothing but food for thought, and I'm hoping to just sort of crystallize more of my feelings and ideas about all of this as a topic and as a subject, either on Substack or on like subsequent videos that'll happen. I'll take this time to ask for comments, questions, and concerns in the comment section, and I would love to know about your sort of like specific historical moment hyperfixations, anything you have to say about cults, cult survivors, cult leaders. It's just like a very curious, rich, huge subject, because I do think the word cult can mean almost anything. I do think like zooming out of high control groups with the word cult is important, especially in times like these when it does kind of seem like our entire country is run by a cult leader. In some ways there's some overlap there. As always, I'm curious to hear what your thoughts are. Forever curious to hear from you, and until next time, bye. Okay, editor's note, hello. I didn't talk about any occult examples at all. I was hungry when I made that video. I'm still hungry, so I'm going to circle back to this topic at a later date when I'm not hungry. Bye!